All right, and now we're going to look at the last part of the executive branch. How does the executive branch operate at the state and local level? Well, at the state and local level, executive branches look very similar to the national one because we take inspiration, most states do, from the national constitution. They protect life and property. It is the responsibility of state and local governments. The governor at the state level is essentially the same as the president at the federal level. They lead the executive branch at each state. The lieutenant governor is elected official serving as deputy to the governor. You can think of them as kind of like the vice president. That's their role. Gubernatorial, meaning of or relating to the governor. So if ever you hear gubernatorial powers or something like that, that's related to the governor. Now, what role do the state and federal level legislative branches play with regards to appointments of the governors and the president's cabinet? They must approve the nominations. This is another check and a balance so that the president or the governor cannot just move into office and appoint all these advisors they might be a little bit extreme or anything like that. It has to go through another branch to be checked and balanced. Now, the roles, powers, and requirements. Roles. You might recognize these because they're pretty similar to the president because they're essentially fulfilling the same thing, just at different levels of government. Head of state, party leader, chief executive, legislative leader, state economy, commander-in-chief of the National Guard. Now something important things. The president can also speak at party events, not just governors. As head of state, they will represent important people, host dinner parties. President does the same thing. Executive orders at the state level. They can do that. They can call a state of emergency. When we had our big floods, and at different times you will hear states issue, this state is in a state of emergency. That comes from the executive branch, the governor. Legislative leader, they promote certain legislation. They have the veto power, which we covered in the legislative branch unit already. State economy, try to increase employment, give tax credits when they can. Now, commander-in-chief of the National Guard in their state. They cannot activate the National Guard to go overseas to war. The president is in charge of the national military and overseas conflict. So somebody like Minnesota cannot activate their National Guard and go to war with Canada because they want some more maple syrup or something like that. States are not allowed to go to war, but the National Guard can be activated under the governor and then put under the role of the executive branch at the federal level, and then they can be sent over. Powers. Now, these are dependent. Every governor, for the most part, they're the same, but it does depend on how the states write their constitution. They carry out laws. They supervise the executive branch. They issue a state of emergency. They can line item veto and regular veto. They can call a special session, which essentially is getting the legislative branch back together. They make the state budget, and they can activate the Guard in times of need. Natural disasters, riots, helping any cities, doing whatever they can. In the Midwest, when the floods happen, the National Guards get activated. If tornadoes happen, the National Guard might get activated in certain parts to go back and help them. Now the requirements. A resident of their state, pretty much just like the House of Representatives and Senators, need to have lived there for 5 or more years. Most governors serve 4-year terms. Again, very reflective of the presidency. In most elections, to win, the candidate just needs a plurality, which means they just need just over 50%. The largest number of votes in an election. That's what the plurality is. But it can be less than 50. So if you have 4 parties, then you're probably not going to have one party that has over 50%, but you might. But you could have a party at 40%, a party at 30%, and 2 at 15%. That 40% still wins. Usually, though, there's still competitions between the 2 main parties, so it's usually going to be revolving around 50% or just over. In most states, the governor and lieutenant governor are elected on the same ticket. They'll both be applied there, but again, this is dependent on state constitutions. Recall. What happens with a recall? Voters can vote a governor out of office if they do not do a good job. So this is kind of like impeachment. If you think of impeachment as trying to get them out of office for doing something bad, it's a very simplistic view of looking at it. But as a representative, somebody that's elected in office, governors, presidents, legislative branch people, usually they say, I'm going to do this, this, and this once I get into office. So please vote for me. If they do not do that, then some people will come out and say, we should recall this person, get them out of office, and get somebody into office that can actually do that. So supporters of recalling officials say that those who run for office should keep their campaign promises, and if they don't, they can get them out of office. Now, looking at the local level. Local governments have mayors, city councils, and even departments. Would a city ever decrease its public safety and health expenses, even though it should be protecting these areas? Yes. Tight budgets, they're a big problem. Cities, depending on the size, have a very small budget, and they have to determine what could be cut, what not could be cut, how much to spend on infrastructure. Is the state helping, depending on the types of roads for infrastructure? Is it just all down to the city? Cities in the Midwest that have hot summers and cold winters have it really bad, especially because of freezing. Do citizens ever attend board meetings or city council meetings? Yes, they do. The more closely it affects people's lives, the more often they will attend. Let's say there's a grocery store going up in a neighborhood, and the city council has to rezone that area to make it commercial for allow a business to move in. People related to that area of town might go to the city council meeting and say, hey, we don't want this. Now, if you live on the other side of the city, it doesn't really apply to you, so you're not really going to care to go to the city council meeting, but you might still go. Now, there's this little video. If you've ever seen Parks and Rec, they have a lot of city council meetings. We're not going to watch it here, because last time I did, the video didn't work. So, if you want a good entertainment laugh about what some extreme city council meetings could look like based on a TV show, I highly recommend coming to the slides and looking at them. And that's pretty much it for the local governors and state level of the executive branch. So, very, very similar to the federal level. We're not going to spend a lot of time, but when you're also thinking of like law enforcement, those are parts of the executive branch. You have state level law enforcement, federal level law enforcement, local, city police departments, all different levels of executive branches in different areas of the state. So, a very, very important part of our Constitution. It's the second article, and this is one of the big areas that they expanded on that they didn't really have in the Articles of Confederation. So, thanks for listening.